Apple I looks a little basic and is even sold without a screen, which means its users have to hook it up to a television screen all by themselves. Operating it requires both computing and do-it-yourself skills.
The Apple I you cannot call a personal computer, and here's why. You had to be a technician to buy one of those. You had to know how to hook wires according to some diagrams on a sheet of paper. You had to learn how to hook up some monitor or get a signal into your own TV set. You had to figure out how to buy some transformers to get voltages into the computer. And so it was a little bit, you had to know some things to build it.
Steve Jobs is quick to realize that a clientele restricted to computer experts and initiates is just not enough. His ambition is to sell home computers to the mass public. So he asks Wozniak to refine his invention and make it accessible to the public at large. Wozniak gets right to work and hands in the fruit of his labors a few weeks later, Apple II.
What's in here is all of the code that was in an Apple II that made it operate. All this code without a single bug.
So you must be pretty proud of yourself.
I don't know how I did it. I never do that again. Yes, I am proud. I'm proud of what that was. Yeah.
Wozniak has no idea how he did it. Steve even less so. But they have something the others don't have: vision. Firstly, it has a lot to do with the design. Apple II has lost that homemade appearance. It's enclosed in plastic casing and comes with a monitor and a disk drive. Jobs has just transformed some obscure machine into an object of mass consumption.
So the Apple II was revolutionary in that it was the first computer of the time, the personal computer of its time, that was a complete computer, that was ready to go out of the box. It was really a consumer device.
All that remains now is to convince American families to acquire this future product for their homes. And Steve Jobs has the answer to that one: advertising. This is his first campaign. The Apple II is represented at the heart of family life. From the comfort of his own kitchen, Mr. Apple II owner can check his shares on the stock market. In the late 1970s, that still belongs in the realm of science fiction. And that's where Steve Jobs' genius lies, bringing technology into our daily lives and, 20 years before the era of internet, being the first to imagine simple, useful, and entertaining products that will change people's lives. It's 1970, and young engineer Andy Hertzfield has just been hired by Jobs. Andy remembers the new computer's dizzying success the moment it went on sale.
Selling 1,000 computers a month was a huge hit for Apple. They were happy to sell 1,000 computers a month back in 1978.
The two founders posed proudly for posterity. By the early 80s, their adventure has become a success story. Just 4 years after starting out in a garage, the small firm has become a key Silicon Valley company. The Apple II has conquered America. 300,000 units have been sold, and now it even equips schools. U.S. school kids learn computing on the Apple II. In the late 80s, the young company is listed on the stock market and the floodgates open. Nearly 5 million Apple shares are snapped up within minutes, and the company's value leaps 32% on the first day. The two young Steves become millionaires overnight. Jobs is 25 and Wozniak is 30. Their combined net worth is $300 million. Their lifestyles explode accordingly. This is Wozniak's Porsche with its Apple II license plate.
I'd never owned my own house in my life. I'd never have enough money. I didn't think I'd ever have enough money in my life for a vacation to Hawaii even. That's how I was. And all of a sudden, whoa, now I've got everything. Yeah, so it was a nice feeling.
But gradually, the brilliant inventor withdraws from the company, preferring to devote himself to his passions, cobbling together strange inventions, or even organizing big folk music concerts. What's more, having Steve Jobs as your partner isn't easy. He just never has enough. He wants to control everything, absolutely everything. For Jobs, the adventure was only beginning. The young boss of this first startup in history becomes the darling of the media. Icon of a new generation, he features on the covers of top magazines, presented as a guru of Silicon Valley. And his aura spreads across the Atlantic. Here's how he was presented on French TV in the early 80s.
The example to follow, the goal to reach, is that of the employee who becomes a millionaire by setting up his own company. Such is the case of Steve Jobs, inventor of Apple microcomputers.
He was on the cover of Time magazine when he was 27 years old. He was worth hundreds of millions of dollars and was a cultural hero in his 20s.
Steve Jobs, who already was not exactly modest, would become a total megalomaniac. His goal was to become the undisputed leader of the IT world. Nothing less would do. This is 1981. The IT sector is dominated by IBM, at the time one of the world's biggest multinationals. Employing over 350,000 people, it makes most of the world's mainframe computer systems. Yet that year, IBM in turn decides to take on the personal computer market by launching the IBM PC, largely inspired by the Apple II. Will this heavyweight competitor manage to undermine Apple's newfound supremacy? The response of Jobs and his teams is a definite no. They didn't believe for 1 second in the future of the IBM PC, and they even chose to celebrate with fruit juice.
We rushed out and we got one and immediately started taking it apart. And we just started laughing at when we saw how poorly it was designed.
Initially, the people at Apple looked at the IBM and said, what a piece of crap this machine is. It doesn't do anything, interesting. It's not, doesn't have the graphics capabilities that this has. It doesn't deal with the disk operating system the same way ours does. It doesn't have the software. It's a big, clunky, ugly box.
Yet despite Steve Jobs' scorn for the PC, it sells well. It even eats into the Apple II's market share, but its success came down to just 3 letters.
But that big, clunky, ugly box had the letters on it, IBM. And for too many people at that time, IBM was a safe bet, and they were willing to buy IBM over anything else, no matter how good the competition was.
His pride hurt, Steve Jobs decides to react. Convinced of his superiority, he wants to crush IBM. It becomes his obsession. And to lead this war, he sets out to recruit a businessman. And not just anybody, John Sculley, the CEO of Pepsi-Cola, the man who made his reputation by shaking up one hell of a competitor, Coca-Cola. The teaming up of the two men is headline news. Their plan to take on IBM even makes the cover of Businessweek. Steve Jobs has no doubts whatsoever, as illustrated by the way in which he asked Sculley to join him.
No talking. That famously is how Steve Jobs helped attract John Sculley to come to Apple. He said, do you want to make sugared water, or do you want to have a chance to change the world?
To change the world. Such was the mission of Steve Jobs. And he'll go all out to make it happen, whatever the cost. Steve Jobs now devotes himself 100% to carrying out a major project. A computer, so avant-garde that it would outstrip its competitor IBM for good. Its name, the Macintosh. To design it, he demands total devotion from his teams. His Apple engineers must be willing to sacrifice everything. For Andy Hertzfield, it wasn't all happy memories.
He came over to my cubicle. He goes, I got good news for you. You're working on the Mac now. I said, great. Just give me a day to finish up this Apple II stuff I was doing. And he goes, what's this? What stuff are you talking about? What's more important than working on the Macintosh? And I told him my Apple II project. And he goes, that's no good. It'll come to nothing. You're starting on the Mac now. What he did was he took my Apple II and he pulled it out. He pulled the plug out. So I lost everything I was working on. And he didn't stop with that. He picked up the Apple II and started walking away with it.
He pushed his employees to the limits. There's a famous story that he had T-shirts made up for the Macintosh team that said, working 90 hours a week and loving it.
90-hour work weeks. After 3 years at this frenetic pace, the Macintosh is ready at last. Planned launch, January 1984. Yet 1984 was also the title of a novel by George Orwell, a futuristic book denouncing a totalitarian society dominated by a dictator, Big Brother. Steve Jobs wants to use its message. He calls upon Ridley Scott to shoot a commercial.
Let's show them why 1984 won't be like 1984.
Today we celebrate the first glorious
It depicts hordes of gray, expressionless people marching robot-like into an auditorium to hear Big Brother's speech.
Where each worker may bloom, secure from the pests.
This all fit into Apple's vision of the world as Big Brother, IBM, and them as the saviors to Big Brother.
Hence, the slaves in the advert represent all those employees condemned to use IBM computers in their company, while the young rebel sportswoman obviously stands for the Macintosh.
One cause. Our enemies shall talk themselves to death, and we will.
They were going to break people free from the oppression of mainframes and boring stuff in business, and Apple was going to save everybody.
We shall prevail.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
The reason why the Macintosh doesn't feature in this advert is because Steve Jobs wants the privilege all for himself, that of presenting his baby to the entire world. Andy Hertzfeld recalls that famous 24th of January 1984, the day that Macintosh was revealed.
I hope they pan and show the whole auditorium. Yeah, they do. Just everyone's going nuts.
That day, before a full and frenzied auditorium, Steve Jobs staged his own consecration.
You've just seen some pictures of Macintosh. Now I'd like to show you Macintosh in person.
In a US-style show to his glory and that of his creature, he sets out to demonstrate his technological advance, to make interacting with a computer more human at last. On giant screens, we discover its animation and graphics capabilities. For the first time, a computer even lets people draw. By way of illustration, a portrait of himself. And Jobs is more megalomaniac than ever. Just listen to what he has his machine say.
But right now, I'd like to sit back and listen. So it is with considerable pride that I introduce a man who's been like a father to me, Steve Jobs.
Steve Jobs can barely hide his emotion, persuaded that his baby will enable him to crush IBM and to become, of course, master of the world.
You see that? He really is pretty much crying.
At 29, Steve Jobs is at the pinnacle of his glory. The Mac and his demonstration are a stroke of genius. He's neither inventor nor engineer, and yet the Mac is his creature, the first personal computer ever. The press is unanimous. It's a revolution, and on the sales front, it's a knockout. Despite its costly sales price, the Macintosh is snapped up. $2,500, twice the price of an IBM machine.
The Macintosh was phenomenally successful early on. It really appealed to a group of people who had not found the computer for them, as Apple used to say, for the rest of us.
What distinguishes the Mac from all its rivals is its extreme user-friendliness.